Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're diving into the world of negative track delay. It is a powerful tool for tightening up your productions and improving the efficiency of your workflow. But it also has a major impact on how you design and manage your templates. Now, there are already some great videos out there that cover the basics. In this video, however, we're going to tackle the more complex challenges that come up when you start implementing negative delay in your template, especially the practical issues you will face when working with tricky legato transitions that have multiple speeds, like those in the Cinematic Studio series. I'll show you how to create adaptable macros that help you seamlessly navigate these challenges, so you can streamline your workflow and get the most out of your libraries. So, let's get started. When sample developers create an instrument, the sample editors usually cut the audio right at the transient. But once those samples are imported into the playback engines like Kontakt or Sine, the developers often pull the sample start back by a small amount, which gives headroom and helps avoid clicks and pops during playback. Now, while trimming the transient is a common practice across all developers, how much they pull back the start point varies, sometimes drastically. It depends entirely on the developer's philosophy. And as a result, instruments and articulations from different libraries, and even within the same library, can have different delays. What that means is even if your MIDI notes are perfectly quantized, what you hear won't be locked to the grid. And when you start layering multiple libraries to build a more polished mockup, those inconsistencies add up fast, and you end up with a cue that sounds like a complete mess. Now, there are two ways to deal with this, though only one of them is practical. Option 1, manually nudge every MIDI notes off the grid to compensate for each library's delay. But that's a massive time sink, not to mention mentally draining. Option 2, set up negative delay value to counteract the sample delay, so that your MIDI notes stay aligned with the playback timing. And once you've set those negative delay values correctly, they will remain effective regardless of the tempo. And more importantly, it unlocks something powerful. You can now copy and paste the part across different libraries for production and have everything play back in sync. Which solution is superior needs no further explanation. The biggest challenge in setting up negative delay is the lack of proper documentation from many sample developers. Like I mentioned earlier, the sample delay isn't just different between libraries, it also varies between instruments and even articulations within the same patch. Now, multiply that by the number of libraries in your template, and you're staring at a pretty massive workload just to measure and apply negative delay value across the board. Now, some developers, like the Cinematic Studio series, actually publishes this information in their user manual, which makes life a lot easier. But most major developers like Spitfire Audio or Orchestral Tools either don't include this information at all or just gloss over it. That means you'll have to go through each articulation by year or trial and error. Now, you can do this in a couple ways. One, you can program a quantized MIDI line and then trigger a given articulation during the playback with the clicks on, and keep adjusting the negative delay value until it locks in. Or two, you can print that MIDI line into an audio and then manually measure the offset. Either way, it is a pretty labor-intensive process, but it is also a necessary suffering that will save you enormous amount of time later on. There are two main approaches to applying negative delay values. The first one is track-based negative delay, which is available in all major DAWs. You can either dial in the value directly in the track inspector or by using a MIDI modifier like timeshift, which will apply a fixed negative delay value to all MIDI notes on that track. Now, if you're experienced with template building, you'd probably already see the limitation. Using this method doesn't play nicely with articulation switching, and that is because sample delay values varies across articulations within the same instrument. So if you're using key switches or expression maps if you work in Cubase or articulation sets if you work in Logic to switch articulations within a single track, that one negative delay value will only offset correctly for one articulation. All of the others will either be under or overcompensated, which kind of defeats the purpose of setting up negative delay in the first place, since you will still need to be manually shifting notes off the grid. And that's why this method works best when you load one articulation per track. It gives you the flexibility to fine-tune the delay value for each articulation without messing up others. The second approach is only available in Digital Performer. In DP's articulation map, you can actually assign different negative delay value per articulation within the same articulation map on the given track. It works off the same philosophy as Cubase's expression map, but it takes it one step further and, in my opinion, makes it practical since it solves the issue I just described, where you're stuck applying a fixed value across multiple articulations. So for my own workflow, I use a combination of both approaches inside DP, which gives me a lot more flexibility. Until Cubase and Logic add similar functionalities to their articulation switching systems, you will be somewhat restricted to using split articulation patches if you want precise timing. For the rest of this video, I'm going to assume you're working with a more common track-based delay method. Most articulations fall into three categories: short articulations, long articulations without legato transitions, and long articulations with legato transitions. Setting up negative delay for short articulations and non-legato long articulations is fairly straightforward, as long as the sample developers has done a good job managing delay consistency. You just measure once and apply a fixed negative delay value. But that's a big if. Some developers are notorious for poorly edited round robins, meaning the delay value varies across repetitions. If that's the case, then managing the delay becomes nearly impossible unless you deactivate the round robins, which also defeats the purpose of using them. And that's the big reason why some libraries, despite being recorded with world-class musicians in amazing spaces, aren't featured that frequently in professional templates. In most cases, the ease of programming and consistency trump sound quality. Now let's talk about legato transitions, the trickiest category by far. First of all, legato transitions are only triggered when notes overlap with each other. That means the first note of any legato phrase doesn't trigger a transition. It plays like a sustain. So if you've applied a negative track delay meant for legato, that first note will play back rushing, since legato transitions usually have longer delays than sustains. Secondly, libraries like Cinematic Studio Strings have multiple legato speeds triggered by MIDI velocity. For example, if the velocity falls within 0 to 64, it triggers the slow legato transition, which, according to the user guide, has roughly 333 milliseconds delay. If the velocity is between 65 to 100, it triggers the medium legato transition with around 250 milliseconds delay. And MIDI velocities that falls within 101 to 127 triggers the fast legato transition with around 100 millisecond delay. This means your legato line could include 3 different delay values, depending on the velocity. A single negative track delay can only offset one of them correctly. So, what do? One option is to force all notes into a single velocity range using a velocity modifier, but again, that sacrifices realism of the performance. Manual nudging, on the other hand, is slow and counterproductive. Neither solution is ideal. What we need is a way to automate the identification and correction of the notes that trigger different legato speeds. Here's how I solve this problem. Step 1. Decide whether to use the library in standard or advanced mode. For this example, we will go with the advanced mode, which gives us slow, medium, and fast transitions. Step 2. Set a negative track delay to offset the delay for one of the legato transition speed. We will set it up for the slow transition. That means the medium and fast notes will now be overcompensated and sound rushed. Step 3. Build macros to fix that. If you're using Cubase, you can do this with a built-in macro editor. In Logic or DP, we'll need to leverage the power of Keyboard Maestro. Start by creating 2 velocity filter presets to highlight notes with young velocity in the 65 to 100 range and 101 to 127 range. Next, measure the amount of overcompensation for each range. Then create presets that shift those notes later in time by the appropriate amount. With some quick calculation, we know that we need to shift medium speed transitions by 83 milliseconds and fast transitions by 233 milliseconds. You will also need a way to remember time range of the selected legato line so that you can recall that selection after applying each fix. In DP, you can use remember time and set selections to remember time. In Cubase and Logic, you can simulate this with set locators to selection, followed by set selection to locators. And once that's up, here's the macro flow. First, we need to select the legato phrase and remember its time range. Then filter for medium velocity notes and shift those. Then reselect the range, filter for fast velocity notes and shift them. Then reselect the range again, highlight only the first note of the phrase, shift it separately since it doesn't trigger a legato transition. One thing you'll notice is that I inserted short pauses in between most of the commands, as doing so helps stabilizing the entire macro. What you end up with is a macro that automates the entire process of identifying which notes need correction, applying the proper offsets, and handling that first note. And the best part is that the logic behind the macro chain can be adapted to any library with legato transitions, with minimal changes to the steps. For instance, I'm not a huge fan of the slow legato transition speed in CSS, so I use it in standard mode in my template, which means I'm only working with medium and fast legato speeds. And all I have to do is this: create a new search filter that covers the expanded velocity range for fast legato transitions, set the negative track delay to offset the medium speed, measure the required offset for fast legato after the medium delay is applied, and remove the steps for selecting and offsetting medium speed transitions from the macro chain. By following the steps in this video, you'll be able to create macros that effectively handle variable negative delays in your libraries. This can significantly speed up your writing, sequencing, and stem printing workflow. That said, one thing to keep in mind is that these macros will shift some of your notes off the grid, since the negative track delay only compensates for one of the legato transition speeds. This can create extra work during the MIDI cleanup stage for orchestration, as you may need to re-quantize those notes. The solution is actually pretty straightforward. Assuming your production uses more than one library, and one of them has variable legato speeds, like the Cinematic Studio series, you can simply remove that library during the MIDI cleanup stage. This is actually a common step when prepping cues for orchestration, removing any duplicated libraries that were only used for production purpose. Once that's done, you're left with libraries that don't have multiple legato speeds, which means you won't need to go through every phrase for further cleanup. All you need to do is quantize the first note of each legato phrase, since those are the only notes shifted off the grid to compensate for the delay, and you're good to go. And that's it. Hopefully this gave you a clear, practical roadmap for dealing with negative delays, especially when it comes to libraries with multiple legato transition speeds. Now, if you found this video helpful, feel free to drop any questions or share your own workflow in the comments. I'd love to hear how others are handling this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.